everyone now largely posts their data through 4 companies in the West, right? And so this issue of centralization isn't something to be afraid of, it's something that's here, right? There's a question there, which is to say, what would an alternative look like? We've spent a lot of time in policy circles. I mean, the past couple of years, we've built a kind of a consent protocol around AI data. There's currently like 2 billion pieces of work that's been opted out. What we're trying to do ultimately is kind of revive the spirit of public good or public commons when we think about these issues, because it really is possibly the only parallel development that could happen to impede or at least compete or create market competition. What people don't factor is that when we're talking about things like image models, things like music models that produce really good 3-minute songs that sound great or whatever, these are actually a different category of model where the only thing impeding there being more open or public alternatives is actually the data. Internet Explorers.
Oh yeah, we are back, episode 53, Internet Explorers. Glad to have you all here with us. It's been a big week. I can tell it's been a big week because we haven't been doing a whole lot out there in the world. Our C Club curated channel's been a bit slower. It's just because what have we been trying to do? Trying to figure out what the hell's actually happening out in the market today. What's this? We need to change everything and reorganize our entire future yet again. Not really, but maybe. But an exciting week. And I think for those that hung out with us last week, we had an awesome show. We got to go deep with the folks that are, it felt like this wave just broke, and then everybody was out there experimenting, and we were able to get a bunch of folks in. So if you missed last week's episode, it's up on all your favorite podcast platforms. Just search Internet Explorers. It was good. It also sort of gave me this feeling of like still so early. And it's why I'm excited about today's chat, Josh, because this AI thing obviously has its roots way, way back in the past as people were playing around with it, and especially the intersection of crypto, which is, I think, our biggest interest. And so it was very exciting that we were able to pull Mat from Spawning.AI and Source Plus up here with us today. So we're going to get into that. And Mat and his team, we can actually go way far back and start talking about some of the early experiments that they've done. And then they had a big release this week, dropping terabytes upon terabytes of, I guess, royalty-free or CCO content. That's what I'm looking for people to train these models on, right? And so Mat is the type of guy who's been thinking deeply about how the humanity and the artistry and the creativity gets to be leveraged and also not forgotten, I guess, in this new era. So excited to jump into that. This fat wallet thesis, I was just looking at your links today, and I was like, that is the one link that I should have clicked to read deeper because I thought it was going to be interesting. So I'm very excited to get into that. We're going to talk about chain moves because apparently that's the thing this week. I am moving to my own chain.
Someone else's.
Wow, I just feel like we might as well just move to our own if we're going to do anything. Meme coin resilience, I love it. So great show today. You got anything to say, Josh? You got any reflections?
Not really. No, just another week of kind of AI trying to make sense of what's happening. I think we've been very focused on all like the speculative use cases and like emerging speculative activity that's been happening. So excited to chat to Mat, who's been in this way before it was cool, building a very like non-speculative use case for it, just to kind of go a little level deeper. And
yeah, I think that's a good thing. We were chatting this week, just feeling like, zooming out and realizing that often in crypto, you get these speculative waves that catch on very quickly, die out somewhat quickly, but what they kick off is sort of like a new optimism and belief in new categories, etc. And so we sort of see this slow, steady march on. So yeah, exciting.
Yeah,
cool. All right. Yeah, I should, but I do have a quick question for you though, because I know your last night was a big night in your household. What do the kids dress up as?
So we were, my daughter was she was a princess and demanded that the rest of us were like her unicorn pet.
Nice.
So that's what we were, and it landed. They were happy. Andy, it starts. There's so much energy and everyone's so pumped, and then it ends so fast, and then now you're just home and just consumed too much candy, and now you got to kind of deal with the implications of that. But it's always good. It's always fun.
We went to some haunted houses last night, and we're ones where like people jump out and try to scare you, and I just followed my wife through it, and she got to enjoy all the scares, and I got to laugh very hard at her.
That's smart. You want to be in the second place.
Oh, they chase you from behind too, though, man. Like the back, you gotta cover the rear. Anyways, this is not the point. Let's bring Mat up. Thank you for dedicating some of your evening to us talking about Halloween here, which I don't think matters to anywhere else. It's like a thing North America, but nowhere else.
That's not true. No, I took my son to school yesterday, and his whole school was dressed as witches and vampires. So it's it's a thing everywhere. Yeah, America has the habit of exporting its culture
that way. All right, man. Well, I mean, I feel like there's like 17 different directions for us to go in here, but let's start off really quickly. How are you introducing yourself, and what are you working on?
Oh, wow. Yeah. I'm Mat Dryhurst. I guess I'm an artist, but I'm also a co-founder of the organization Spawning that has obviously been collaborating with C-Club for some time. And so generally speaking, we work on protocols for data governance and art exhibitions and all manner of different things that all kind of tie in together somehow. But with Spawning, more explicitly, we're focused on this kind of question of building out public AI resources. So thinking about machine learning and AI models as public goods. And they're starting to actually really break some ground on that after a couple of years of kind of being in the trenches on policy debates and so on and so forth and trying to figure out where this is going. Yeah. But to that end, I mean, my partner Holly and I have been working in the machine learning space for the best part of 10 years now. And so in a strange way, like, I mean, it's always surprising how things turn and also what catches on. But in some ways, I feel like I'm somewhat qualified to contextualize a lot of the stuff that's going on at the moment.
Far more qualified than either of us. So experts.
So I can just make things up.
Oh no, that's key. It's and very respected in this AI landscape. Apparently, you just call it a hallucination, and you're good.
Exactly, I'll hallucinate something.
Okay, so I feel like for me at least, there's a couple of main phases here, and I want to take us right back to an experiment that you guys did last year or 2 years ago with the Holly project. Was it Holly AI?
Holly
Am I right? Or am I?
Oh, Holly Plus. Yeah, that was like 2021.
Yeah. Okay, I knew it was forever.
Yeah, that was like. So, yeah.
Holly Plus was, I mean, I'll let you sort of describe it, but it was a project that got you guys featured on TED, right? Like this was a thing. So tell us about Holly Plus.
Yeah, I mean, a bit of backstory. So as I said, we've been working with machine learning going back to like 2017, and the interesting thing for us was actually to start looking at the nuts and bolts of how models come together, right? So we put together our own data sets. We were doing like AI model training performances here in Berlin with like hundreds of people in 2018, thinking about like deliberately contributing to these models as being something, something bespoke, something that you could kind of claim ownership of. And, the one thing that occurs to you even back then when we first started thinking about training models is you're like, oh, this data question is going to become kind of a big deal because you have this choice. It's like, okay, you've got these model architectures, you've got your compute, like, what are you going to train it on? And so you immediately have a decision to make, like, do I use my data? Do I lift it off someone else? Do I use Michael Jackson or whatever? And so over that time, we've just spent a lot of time thinking about where this is likely to go, and also like the degrees of freedom for individuals or artists to kind of explore this stuff in an interesting way that's kind of in their favor. And so, the Holly Plus project, we put it together in 2021. And the basic idea was, can we decentralize? So my wife, Holly, is best known maybe for being a musician. Can we decentralize her identity and set up a protocol of governance around an AI model that represents her voice to, say, okay, well, we're totally cool with the idea of you just using her voice permissionlessly. That's very much in the spirit of everything we're interested in. However, it would also be nice to offer incentives for people who make work with her voice. We came up with this idea, identity play, as kind of a pun on IP, right? Like, rather than thinking of IP, thinking about offering your identity to other people to use. We could build incentive mechanisms basically to allow for people using her voice to co-release works with us where there's profit splits happening, right? And so we released like an NFT collection, I think it was in 2021, of works made with Holly's voice, where the NFTs were split between we called them spawners and Holly herself. Yeah, and so you can still go. This is actually the old site where you can upload your voice and you can upload recordings of your voice and get Holly back. Yeah, TED showed interest from that, and we went there and Holly demoed the kind of concept and also showed off. We worked with a partner to develop a real-time timbre transfer voice. So basically, a guy, for a friend of ours, is singing and then Holly's voice comes out. It's funny because like we were thinking about this a long time before anything. It was, this was like when it was just TED. It wasn't like TED AI. I think there was us and maybe one other guy that day talking about AI at all. But of course, it went really well. People got quite excited about it. And I think that those ideas of thinking about IP on chain, thinking about sharing your identity, thinking about profit splits and kind of permissive, opening up decentralizing your identity have since been kind of mimicked by others and and actually weirdly have kind of informed policy. Like it's one of these like canonical projects now that you hear in policy circles where they're like, oh yeah, like kind of like Holly Plus, right? It's like you can, yeah. So
what I loved about it was both the performance. It was just, I mean, it was just like, and I dropped a link in the chat, Josh, or if anybody's dropping links in our other public chat so people can see it. But it's phenomenal, right? Like you watch that, and especially when it came out, you're like, how is this even possible? And it's just this man singing like Holly, and it sounds incredible. And I think even with like the governance stuff was clearly ahead of its time, but in a similar way, I think it captured attention of the people who were thinking about this sort of stuff, and kind of it gave it a new framework for at least a starting point for people to think about. And I just think it's such a powerful thing to do stuff like this, stuff that doesn't. And I think even ChatGPT in a certain way was like that. It was not an expected. They didn't expect that to be the breakout product that it became, right? And so this experimentation, and I love those moments we sort of move through it, and you can sort of, which I think we're in right now, and you can look back over the years and sort of see like the impactful things that have led to it. But I think the bigger thing that seems to be relevant today, and I think will be more relevant in the future, is the sort of idea of the commons for AI, or a public AI. And I think it's often driven by this fear of the centralizing power of AI generally. And I think Peter Thiel has talked about that, in interesting ways.
Yeah, AI is communist or something.
AI is communist and crypto is libertarian. Yeah, which I think is. Yeah, and they're coming together in interesting ways. So there's something there too, maybe.
It's a prompt to contest. Yeah.
Fair. So, but I think this is, we had Cortland on last week, who's building Plastic Labs. And has a similar belief, right, in the importance of bringing people into this world versus what might happen if not. And I'm curious if you can maybe make like why are the commons so important, especially when it comes to AI from your point of view, and can you maybe give us like what is giving you optimism right now that we aren't going to run into the same sort of challenge that we have in the internet with three big companies owning everything?
Well, in a way, I mean, I qualify optimism as kind of factoring all the bad things that could happen, right? I mean, I think that if you're being really honest with people, the internet went that way. Now, these old ideas of public domain are kind of outmoded because we don't really use the web as we once did, right? If you think about Creative Commons and all these, they kind of exist as memes, but they don't really have that much practical utility now, because this was for the time of Flickr and blogging and so on and so forth. Like everyone now largely posts their data through 4 companies in the West, right? And so this issue of centralization isn't something to be afraid of, it's something that's here, right? And so there's a question there, which is to say, what would an alternative look like? We've spent a lot of time in policy circles. I mean, the past couple of years, we've built kind of a consent protocol around AI data. There's currently like 2 billion pieces of work that's been opted out. We're trying to encourage now people to opt in. And what we're trying to do ultimately is kind of revive the spirit of a public good, or a public commons when we think about these issues, because it really is possibly the only, I don't want to say attack vector, but like the only parallel development that could happen to impede or at least compete or create market competition outside of a few organizations who have all the compute and all the budget. And the good news is that, the one thing when you talk about AI, it's very easy to kind of compress this term into a catch-all for everything, right? So like when I talk about AI models here, I'm not talking about bleeding edge Gemini with 10 million token context window trying to come up with math proofs or something, right? The amount of expertise in-house and compute and data and so on and so forth required to build these things is ridiculous. And I think it would be naive to assume that we could make any dent in those kind of more general purpose models right now with this approach. But what people don't factor is that when we're talking about things like image models, things like music models that produce, really good, 3-minute songs that sound great or whatever, these are actually a different category of model where the only thing impeding there being more open or public alternatives is actually the data. All the architecture, with very, very rare exception, is public. It's available, right? Like we know how to train a music model as good as Suno, with some tweaks or whatever. The only difficulty there is the data delta, right? Mm-hmm. And so what you've seen in some sense is that there's many companies that have kind of gained first mover advantage by basically being like, we'll just try on everything. We'll try on everything, and then the lawyers will come, and then we'll see what ends up happening. And We'll see how that works out. We've taken kind of a different approach of saying, well, actually, I think that for these narrow domains, actually, my co-founder Jordan brings this point up all the time. You're going to end up at a point where the models all converge on quality, right? And we're already seeing this in like the image space. For those who are familiar, right? Like Stable Diffusion XL came out, then Flux came out. It was really good. Now we get stable like SD 3.5, and the competition for these kind of open models is getting to such a point where they're already. It's like there might be a final image model in the next year, right? They're pretty damn good, and you don't need them to be so much better, at least for a narrow domain like producing images. And in that kind of realm, I know how to train, or we as an organization know how to train a Flux, right? With some trial and error. It's not a mystery. The only delta between where we are currently and something as good as a Flux is the data, right? And so I think on a long enough time horizon, it's really worth thinking about, producing public AI models for the benefit of everybody, for a number of reasons that are rather bureaucratic, but we can speak to with some qualification, which is, currently at the moment, if you start talking about ownership in a legal context, an AI model doesn't exist, right? That's why when people talk about all these data things, they're like, oh yeah, they'll bring up copyright, which is already complicated with AI models or whatever. Like they try to attack it from all these ways, but it's like, actually, these are kind of new forms that require a completely new approach to thinking about IP or ownership or whatever. And actually, one of the key reasons why the Copyright Office in the United States, for example, says, no outputs from an AI model can be owned. They can't be copyrighted by anybody, is because of this data provenance question. And so something like a base public AI model really asks a really interesting question of policy and regulation and law, which is to say, well, wait a second, if I can train, which we're doing right now, we're going to release a model called Public Diffusion soon. It's kind of the addendum to this. If we have a fully public domain based model and I'm a visual artist and I fine tune that model on my data, why can't I own it? Right? What's stopping me? So the way that you actually push policy on this, I think, is to actually take this public approach. And that's also the way that companies and artists alike can start thinking about offering their own competitive models. And I think this is where the centralization debate becomes really interesting. Because right now, look, I know people at OpenAI and Google, whatever, they're really smart people who are doing great work and I enjoy their products, whatever, right? But their incentive obviously is an app store model, right? Their incentive is like, we're going to build this substrate, then we want everyone to come in and you end up paying a tax, right? to be able to offer your services through fine tunes or whatever. You're like, cool, that's great. But I come from the music industry and it's like, that was the Spotify model. You end up getting paid peanuts. You don't get to set your own rates. This is preaching to the choir in a crypto community, right? One of the first reasons I got interested in Ethereum in like 2016 or whatever was this promise of being like, no, wait, actually decentralized ecosystems allow you to set your own prices. You can build your own economies. And actually that's good for the market, right? You need different competing logics or economies around things. And if it weren't for the open kind of public kind of spirit of the Ethereum blockchain, for example, you wouldn't have had all these different experiments in value creation and so on and so forth that we've seen explode with NFTs and now meme coins, which is another controversial topic, but whatever. But the point is that like giving people the means to be able to take control of things and create an economy for themselves, that's good for everybody. And actually, it's even more important in these kind of more narrow contexts because OpenAI isn't thinking about how a painter is going to make a living in the AI economy. Like they're thinking about other things, right? So you have the one thing I would just say about this kind of public approach is, of course, there is an ethical debate to be had, and I'm actually a bit more kind of nuanced on that than many might expect. I think it's a complicated one and it's interesting, but I'm very pro AI. The thing that I think people are missing is that there is a massive business reason to take public domain work really seriously, which is market competition and decentralization, right? And that aspect is very, very enticing to me because I like the idea, just as I like the idea with Ethereum, of seeing 1,000 flowers bloom, right? I want to see a bunch of different people release their own models with different protocols for their governance. And in order to enable that, you need models that are not sullied by these IP questions, largely due to things like liability, right? Like, OpenAI or Adobe can claim to indemnify you from legal action or whatever, but but a small company or a small actor at this point in time is going to have a really hard time offering a model of themselves that was trained on this base data because they're basically exposing themselves to all kind of litigation that they don't want to incur, So I think that there's a lot more method to this than simply kind of a protest, if that makes sense.
No, I mean, I think it's. Sorry, Josh, I've dominated this. I'll let you ask a question in a second. But I think I've loved watching your responses to AI doomers, and that's maybe not even fair. Like, there's a lot of good critique that's out there that you engage very faithfully in, and I think
there's a lot of bullshit.
It's been fun to see. Yeah, well, for sure. I mean, everywhere. Yeah, but I think the nuance there is useful. So if you're interested in that conversation, just go through Matt's replies, because you'll love that if you just go deep down his replies. But it's very informative, I think, and it starts to show the space, or like the playing field a little bit, or at least like the edges of it. I'm curious. I mean, I guess to me, when I think about public comments, I sort of think there's some decentralized AI stuff happening, but then there's Meta with Llama and their open source approach, which is a very competitive approach right there behind, and so it makes a lot of sense. But are you suggesting that actually the important piece here is actually not Llama, it is the data, and we should be putting most of our focus on ensuring a robust, independent economy on data?
I would say so. I mean, honestly, I'd want to double check the kind of the terms and conditions around Llama, but I suspect that there may be some terms and conditions related to the kind of the commercial exploitation of that model, right? Like, also, we don't know what's under Llama. I mean, there's this whole, when we released PD12M yesterday, if you go to sourceplus/PD12, it comes with its own search engine where you can see all of the data that was included in the data set. It comes with a kind of governance model where you can contest things that are in the data set, so we can pull that out in real time. Llama, even if it were, which I'd need to check, even if it were kind of fully clean for people to build business applications on top of, you still expose yourself to this kind of potential liability because you just don't know what it's trained on. And a lot of these organizations won't tell you that. We're taking a very different approach with this fully transparent thing. We're like, look, we can be fully transparent and train competitive models. We just need more data, and we think we can get more data. Yeah. So I mean, this idea, there's a big debate in the world about like what an open source model even is, or what fully open models would constitute. It seems like people are kind of coming more around to actually the approach we've taken on this model of saying, well, to have it be fully open, you'd really need to be able to, one, use this stuff unconditionally, which you absolutely can do with our data set. And number two, know exactly what's in there, because you don't know what you're getting yourself into. And as I say, this is not on my part like a vote for punitive regulation over this stuff. It's more just to say that we've been in many conversations across continents about this stuff. And for example, in Europe, the AI Act stuff is going to kick into gear, I think, around April. And they're taking very seriously all these data transparency requirements. Like, you need to factor this a little bit. Yeah. I hope that answered the question. I think I forgot the first part of it, but
no, it's good. It's good.
Yeah.
Matt, I guess I'm interested in getting a little more specific on like the future vision of the world that you guys are building towards. So like, how do you see like being a creative, I guess, in this like AI kind of abundant future working? Like, do you see anyone with reasonable attention and community kind of training their own model? It's kind of a way to allow people to participate, maybe some like economic flow that comes from that. Or I guess just like kind of throwing that to you is just a question on specifically how an artist of the future is going to leverage and benefit from this stuff.
Yeah, I think there's I have a couple positions on this. Number one, I'm not like a doomer in the sense that I don't actually think that these AI tools are going to really challenge the cream of artists, right? Like, I think there's still going to be value for people playing guitars or whatever it is that you're doing, or painting. I don't buy into that. And actually, I think it's a bit of a cell phone sometimes when the artist community claims that this stuff is going to completely unseat them. I'm like, well, it's not that easy. Like, my line is, we often confuse the media for the art, right? Like, just because it's people are capable now to produce a bunch of media doesn't mean they can produce art, right? Like, and we've learned that, right? I mean, your feed is full of media, and you can tell the difference between that and a piece of art. And of course, that's subjective. The other thing I would say, though, is that I do think that this is bigger than the internet. I think that like what is about to happen is bigger than the internet. I think it's bigger than social media. I think it's bigger than crypto, right? And so it's important to not think skeuomorphically and not be like, oh, well, how would a musician release an album in an AI context? It's like, no. Like, I think that all habits will change. And so you can only really intuit your way through this. And obviously we've been working with this stuff for quite some time. And so have maybe a bit more calibrated intuition about what domains to explore. But one thing that's quite clear is there is going to be a new market, a new demand for artists releasing and training bespoke models, right? I don't think that every artist in the world is going to do it. I don't think it's going to be worth their time to do it because these things are going to be competitive. But that is one thing that I think it's incumbent on many people to look into pursuing, because I think it's a whole unexplored area here of saying, well, okay, if you are, someone who has, a skill or data to share, it probably is in your interest to think about how people would interact with a model of you in future. And we basically want to build the rails and all of the guts to be able to make that as easy and effortless as possible. Yeah. So it's really hard to tell where these things go. We don't predict the future, but I think that you can just kind of infer this is a big deal, and having some ownership over your data and having some agency over models of yourself that may be economically productive or creatively productive for you makes a whole bunch of sense. And and as I say, I don't think there's many people that have thought about this as long as we have. So I think we're in a decent position to explore that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Maybe we'll wrap it up here. I guess in all of these sort of frontier tech spaces, there's bubbles, and then there's the trough of disillusionment, and AI is definitely, we look at the history of that, been through a series of that. Crypto's obviously in a similar boat. So it basically means that at any given time we're over optimistic about certain things and underweighting others. I'm curious, in your mind, what are we over excited about today, and what are we devaluing that will be bigger in the future?
Ooh, that's an opportunity to be somewhat controversial.
Yes.
I think that a lot of the discussion around agents at the moment is a little misleading and overblown, if I'm honest. Mm-hmm. Which is not to say, I do think it's one of these cases of like narrative leading tech, right? Where like the narrative itself is fascinating. I am a believer that there will be agentic versions of us kind of doing things on the internet, transacting permissionlessly without our control. I buy all that. That's going to happen. But there's a little bit of theater going on at the moment, I think, with like Claude master prompting and this kind of stuff, which to someone who's been in the game more than 10 minutes, it's a little of an eye roll. It feels a little bit like a magic trick where you're like, I get it. This is a bit of a LARP though. So I think that I'm not dismissing agents at all, because I think there's a lot there that's interesting, and I think that Claude master prompts to come up with garbled songs on the internet or something is a little bit overrated. Underrated, I think, actually, I mean, I've got to kind of stand it. AGI conversations, fully automated internet, this is all sexy as hell, right? I love that stuff too. I think about it too. I love to dream about it. There's this other side, which is like, what if the current state of models, what if the current state of models, which, let's be fair, is remarkable, right? Like Notebook LM is remarkable. Large context windows are remarkable. I use this shit all day. It is amazing. What if this is just what we had for the next 10 years, right? Or incremental improvements on top of this stuff? Like, how would this work for everybody? Because currently, and I think that it's not to say that I think that we're going to stall out, because I actually don't think we're going to stall out. I think this is going to continue. But sometimes I think we're prone to kind of get ahead of ourselves. And that's why I think working with the guts and the data actually is somewhat grounding. Because you're like, look, there's so much you can do here. And actually, when you start thinking about it, just pulling the pieces together, you're like, there's a lot of like fundamentally different ways this could go. And actually, we're still very early, as you mentioned in your introduction, right? And so I think that, with this kind of public AI kind of intention and a lot of the work we do, we're kind of like, look, I am very pro AI. I'm super on board. I enjoy these conversations. And I still think there's enough time for there to be very competitive kind of splinter forked visions of how this plays out. And, and sometimes I think that this focus on kind of like fetishism of the latest OpenAI model, the latest Anthropic model, as impressive as they are, can sometimes create a kind of sense of fatalism where you're just like, okay, we're just consumers now. Like, we're just consuming, waiting for the latest update or some random meme account to like speculate on how good GPT-6 is going to be, whatever, right? And I'm like,
shots fired. That's literally me this week. Let's go.
Did you know what I mean? But
well, yeah, for sure. I don't love it.
No, but
it's what the iPhone was like 10 years ago or something, right?
Exactly. I'm not a consumer. You know what I mean? Like and actually that's a bit of the spirit that I kind of liked in crypto always, is that like, crypto is like a builder first scenario where you have like clashing protocols, you're clashing opinions about things. You're like, no, this is like, people will fork and splinter and like flame war about like different ways in which this hypothetical economy is going to work in 20 years. Right. And I'm like, I'd love a bit more energy for that in AI, to be honest. Because it feels a little bit, preaching to the choir.
To me, like and I think this is like a Beth Bezos EACC quote from Lex Friedman, which was actually my first exposure to that whole concept and idea, and it was a great introduction. But he talked about the techno-optimist machine and your agency in that machine determining your level of optimism or sort of a belief in a future. And I think that's huge. And so we have meme coins, or we have AI, or we have agents, or whatever. I think the biggest risk, and again, why I deeply, deeply appreciate you and your work, is that people will just opt out. And opting out and or wait to see how it lands. And I don't think we can, like, in these big epochal shifts, you have to kind of just marinate in them to be an effective participant. And you have to be in them before there's an obvious, clear way of participating. Otherwise, you just become, I think, a consumer of these things, or a data point. So, all right, Matt, let's leave it there, man. We could continue talking, but I think this is just such a great out to our conversation. Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, look out. I mean, I think I very much agree with the importance of AI, both from, I think, the impact it's going to have on how we work, but also is just like a wonderful wedge in that I think actually allows us to bring other disparate conversations or narratives together, right? Whether that's just purely relevance for crypto in a new way, or it's opening up the sort of the broader playing field of what the public versus private blockchains will be. I think that's all incredible. So I usually ask, where can people find you? We got your stuff up here, but my sense is that there's going to be a few listeners who actually want to go deeper and understand sort of the world that you're building in. Is there a community or a newsletter or something that you would want to recommend that would be a good place for people to stay up to date on this side of AI?
I think probably the best is like Spawning and the general Spawning team on Twitter. I'm on Twitter all the time, so that's my.
Just follow Matt. You can get
that's my main comms channel, and like I treat like public posting like DMs. So there's just it's a.
All right.
So but otherwise, I'm not in too many Discords. I dropped the Discords after COVID because I couldn't do it.
Feels for sure. All right, Matt. Have a wonderful weekend, man. Appreciate you hanging out with us, and everybody go check out Spawning. It's a very, very exciting part of the world, and people like to share all sorts of information there. You can literally stay up to date on the leading edge just by hanging out. What a wild thing. All right, Matt, appreciate you, man. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks all. Hey, have a good weekend.
Peace. I kind of love this sort of back and forth, because I feel like, we just get so infatuated with the next thing because we like to learn and make sense of the world. And I think that's kind of what you have to do. But I think it would be wrong to assume that pure speculation is what we mean by consumer crypto, right? And I think actually what Matt was pulling on there, which is, and it even makes me think about the language around consumer crypto a bit, because I think the intention isn't that you are just going to be the consumer of these products, right? And I think actually the user group in crypto is not consumer, it's builder. Everybody's tinkering, making stuff. Today you can launch a meme coin right now, right? Explorer, how we make sense of the world, how we go use new things, and then investor. We are all able to participate in, investing or speculating in these things. And I think that's a very different type of user. And somebody, I think like the high level language or words sometimes miss the nuance there.
I mean, I think that was kind of core to how uncomfortable we were with it when we kind of, shifted and realized it was probably just like the most useful thing to use. So people understood what we were excited by, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't capture our excitement, especially coming out of like so much of the DAO phase, right? It was like, oh shit, there's this new world where anyone can come and participate and share in all the value creation of innovation. And then going from that to like starting to call everything consumer again feels weird and awkward. But
we embrace the awkwardness when smooth braining is needed and reject it when we need to move on. I feel like are we in a rejecting phase? Almost, maybe. We'll see. Evolution. Metamorphosis. Is this setting up for this next? I don't even know what this next
perfectly.
Topic
No,
is,
I mean it really is. It's perfectly setting us up for this because, I think there are two more reasons I just kind of wanted to talk about more about like the what behind C Club. I think one of it is, intentionally we've been very focused on our accelerator and investing activities for the past couple of years. I think we've recognized, saw a lot of people in kind of this like DAO phase, or a lot of these DAOs kind of get caught up in trying to do everything or bring everybody in, and as we recognized that, started rejecting it and realized that so much like the value of this organization or all the leverage that we're going to have to go build a big internet institution is like a very few core pieces in place that are running effectively. So we started on our accelerator and investing, but it's really like a piece of what we're trying to build here. So I think trying to create movement space, just talk about that a little bit. And then I think really like the second, it's kind of what we were talking about at the opening of the show, where, we're kind of in like very, very speculative moment again for crypto, for AI, for the intersection of both of them. And I think obviously it's great and exciting and, so useful for getting attention and your top of funnel. But I think really like core of what excites us is kind of what lies beneath that. And I think we kind of, we're going to figure out the right way to talk about it. And right now we're kind of like condensing all that into, this idea of building a dramatically more interesting internet. So kind of just wanted to create some space to tease that out a little bit.
Yeah, I think, from we have our roots in meme coins. They were just called social tokens. And, the belief was that there was more narrative or social or cultural value embedded in the price of tokens, as low as they were back in 2020, than there was fundamental value. And that this sort of social attention, creative capital is sort of a new type of asset that can be unlocked and priced and invested in and used to build interesting things, right? And so we've been running at that. So I think that was has been our belief and continues to be our belief. I think the big question is how. And so, that's why we started running an accelerator. We had a whole bunch of people who were experimenting with social tokens and nobody knew how. And so we come together, push out our own edges, learn faster. And I think that is the consistent thing through C Club, whether that's through social tokens, DAOs, NFTs, whatever the future brings. And I think, increasingly throughout the last few years, we've seen signals that we're correct, right? Like NFTs, pretty clear example of the social and cultural value. And even today, right, there are 99% maybe are not worth anything, but there's some very valuable NFTs. And I think meme coins in the current moment are a great example of that as well, right? There's just a ton of energy, interest, entertainment, etc. I think the big question though is how do you go from short-term speculation into long-term enduring token? And so we've had one of our core values from day one is believing in the long term. And I think if you believe in crypto and if you believe in technology, you should be taking a multi-decade lens rather than ultimately crypto, which is, it was maybe 10 months and now it's maybe 10 days right now. And so I think the more, to me, like the way you build a valuable token network, which is at the core of, really what our North Star is for C Club, is not just meme and attention, but it's a mechanism that leads to belief. And we talk about Bitcoin a lot through that lens, right? Bitcoin is a social product. It is a consumer product for the first 10 years at the very least. But the magic is in the mechanism that gives you, the deepest sense of belief you can have in a thing. This thing is going to continue to print forever until it isn't. And I have trust in that. And so I think that belief, that mechanism or that forms belief is actually a lot more expansive than just, proof of work. I think it's more expansive than just proof of stake and then blockchains. And so I think, that's the environment that we've been experimenting in. And it's why we launched a meme coin. And it's why we've launched, the various NFT experiments. It's why we're going to put out an agent at some point, if not two. And I still think that the how is a big open question. And some of the most exciting founders that I've talked to lately are actually diving into some of those really big intractable problems. Okay, if everything's moving into an on-chain market, we better figure out how to go launch tokens efficiently here, because that's actually not the most solved problem here in crypto either. So I don't know, I could probably continue to rant on this, but I'll...
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that gives me so much excitement or like confidence that crypto at large is going down the right path is when you just like, realize how like all the downstream impacts of like the limited business models that today's internet actually has. It's like you can go be a SaaS company to raise money, or you can go be a billion person social network to unlock this like ad opportunity to go raise money. And there's like so much you could go build beyond that would create real value for people, but it's largely not investable because you don't have the business models. And
I think purely if crypto just brings out another 3 business models that define the future of the next 10, 20 years, that's actually a big deal. Because what do we have? We have subscription, advertising, and buying something.
Yeah.
And if you don't fit into that, and in fact, actually buying something is actually not that great unless you have huge scale. So it's really, and advertising kind of doesn't really work either. So what do we have? We have all Web 2 accelerators caring about B2B SaaS. And we end up with, how do you sit and talk to Matt for 30 minutes and not think, oh, fuck, I want to hang out at your party. Like, I don't care about the B2B SaaS AI that's going to go and revolutionize, some specific narrative or vertical. So anyways.
I think just such a, tokens are such a simple idea, but I think they have such profound effects on that exact thing for two reasons, right? One is, we talked about this a lot, but just their ability to capture social and cultural value. And now like just being able to go build something people truly want to be a part of and have potentially some ownership in, or like collect things that kind of emerge from it, is kind of handing just building a movement or world that people resonate with and want to be part of a business model. And I think that coupled with the idea that you can just go to market immediately globally whenever you want, and like you're kind of off this IPO treadmill. No one can tell you what isn't valuable. If people on the internet like it and want to collect it or want to be a part of it,
I mean, I think that where people
for something valuable.
Push back against that is very fair, and that the current mechanisms are leave a lot to be desired, right? And I think even if you just think back to the beginning of this year when we were chatting with the Pump.Fund team, like it wasn't clear that was going to break out. They had a couple hundred users, but what they had done was solved a very real problem with how do you get a high velocity of tokens out into the world. You need to add more trust. And I think there's actually a lot more work to be done there. And so I think it's if you look at how things are being done today, and can't think beyond that, I understand why there's sort of a huge reticence around the current meta. I think it's interesting to 100,000 people, right? And so how does this become interesting beyond that? And I think there's still fundamental challenges we need to go solve. But God, there's a lot of smart people working on it. But I just have such faith in it, So
yeah, and I think you can like tangibly. I think we've all like internalized how weird and just like chaotically fun participating in crypto is. But then if you just kind of think back to pre-crypto days and just like how much more boring, kind of sterile that internet feels like, you just know there's something new. And
well, I mean, if you're around at the beginning of Web 1 or Web 2, you know what it was like when there was an open internet. And 100%. I think that this idea of, and maybe it's for people that are coming into the workforce right now, like if you weren't around at sort of one of those turning points where you saw things just blowing wide open, and the type of energy and innovation and entrepreneurship that was sort of born from it, and it's a very different world than we live in today, where we have four dominant networks and environments where M&A and all this sort of stuff are not looking good for entrepreneurs. So I think there's just a ton of value in breaking that wide open. And I mean, I think that is crypto's story. I think that's going to be AI's story in a large part. But both of those require our proactive participation to have a long-term mindset, because let me tell you, there are millions of dollars of incentives to think short-term.
Sure. Let's jump to decentralized agentic organizations. Slow tier. Yeah, I think we've just gone from autonomous agents operating on chain being kind of this like pipe dream to some version of it, some early version of it, like actually just like happening in real time. And it kind of came at a shocking speed, right? So I think just like every team we've been talking to recently is thinking deeply about how they can best position themselves for this kind of new world that's emerging. And many are already running experiments towards it. And I think one of the more interesting kind of lines of exploration or thinking that are coming out of it is just how agents are going to fit into or like solve or help a lot of the DAO issues that we had of last cycle, or how agents and DAOs are going to merge, or how agents are going to become DAOs, or how there were two kind of emerging experiments that are capturing attention, that are kind of maybe hinting at what that's going to look like. One is, I think this happened, late last week, DAOs.fund, AI16Z. So really like the core, I think this is interesting for a few reasons. Like one, the kind of core idea of DAOs.fund is like tokenized meme coin funds, essentially. So anyone can come launch a de facto hedge fund. Basically, people can pool money, and then this fund gets tokenized and launched, and they have some capital to go trade meme coins, and the fund closes after a year, and that gets distributed back to token holders. And the one that kind of went most bananas, or maybe the only one that's really going crazy on the platform, is one called AI16Z. And hilarious for mimetic purposes. I think Mark Andreessen was posting about it, so that drove a ton of attention to it. But the idea that you would have an agent at the center of this hedge fund, and I think the way that they're kind of planning on operating it is within a Discord. This agent exists within a Discord, and people can kind of propose or talk about trading opportunities within it, and it kind of makes sense of it and goes trades based on what it thinks is going to be a profitable trade. So obviously, I'm hesitant, but it's kind of interesting that we're kind of almost running back like the DAO cycle, right? Like the original instance of a DAO was an investment club, And I think it's kind of like an easy starting. Oh, we lost Jess. It's kind of an easy starting point. Because the coordination is easy. It's like, you pool capital and you trade and whatever. So I think, going to be an interesting one to watch. Yeah, maybe I'll pause there.
Yeah, I think conceptually, I think it's fascinating. I saw when they launched it, like announced it, and I was like, oh, that kind of. But then when I saw it launch, I mean, I bought some, so I was like, let's run this back. I think it's not attacking the hard part, so I think it's valuable from a narrative perspective and an attention perspective, and the team's obviously shipping like crazy, trying to get them on the show. But I think that I don't have high expectations that is. I mean, even it would. Just purely to hit its current attention market cap value, it needs to turn $345,000 into more than $26 million. And
100%.
That's very unlikely to happen. But I think, it opens up a really interesting narrative angle. I think Jesse Wallen had a tweet the last couple of days talking about, I was referring to a tweet he had many months ago around, this idea of like, the promise of DAOs is this idea of software at the center and people at the edges, but really in the previous version of DAOs, and I think what you sort of talked about earlier, it was actually just a whole bunch of messy people in the middle with less great organizational structure or decision-making structure for building new things. Mm-hmm. And so I think like this idea of, and we went down this path a little bit, and I think it's rekindled. You're just imagining what, if you think of DAOs today as governance and treasury, what happens when governance becomes an AI or an agent and can kind of be the distributor, the receiver of information, the asker of new questions, et cetera. And so it has got me to think a little bit about, if you think about what is the right way to the structure to launch a token into that captures the social and cultural value. And I think, DAOs were a version of that, NFT communities, I think, And so I think like the ability for, I think an AI could be a new format for a structure for this value to sort of coalesce around. But when you get into the how of that is when you kind of get into the hard questions, right? And so that's what I look at DAO to fund. I'm like, great, we kind of knew attention's valuable already. Really, the thing for them to, they have this attention. Can they go unlock that next piece? And I think it's a very worthwhile experimentation.
Yeah, I think another notable point here is how, on new platforms to pool capital and invest together but how effectively they just kind of repackaged it in a thing that is, very top of mind for people or like a part of the current zeitgeist. So it's like they tokenized it, they made it very mimetic, and someone launched one that had AI, had an AI angle to it and got a ton of attention. So I think just that, trying to break into maybe a category that's been tried again or has a bunch of attention, but doing it in a way that is just much more relevant to the zeitgeist of today, I think is something people should take a lesson from.
Well, you have to in a attention competition world, you got to break through or you're irrelevant, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So, totally. you cannot give up that piece of the building of a business or a product. And in fact, in crypto, it's probably valued more than a lot of other stuff. So
yeah,
which
totally.
I think DAO Stuff Fund is an example of, frankly. So
I think the one other, we briefly talked about this specific last week, but Aether is a bot built by Martin and kind of, hire a line to participate in their higher ecosystem. So at the end of last week, it actually created a bounty for some artwork to get created, which is, cool, agents getting humans to do work for them. And then this week there was a bunch of people that were kind of proactively going to it to seek out partnerships and collaboration. I think Jacobs was, the most interesting and kind of notable conversation where they kind of just went back and forth. Jacob tried to, get some percentage ownership in the future success of the bot, rejected it, eventually landed on the idea that he'd create a piece of artwork that they would release through Ethernet's Zora account. Did super well. I think it made $20,000 with Jacob donated back to the bot. But I think it's interesting kind of thinking about, both Hire and Nouns DAO are kind of running at this like CCO brand opportunity where like the core way that you go build and accrue value is through propagation of the brand. But looking at the kind of like rigidity of Nouns and the like, you have to go to go get funding from Nouns, you'd have to go create a proposal, socialize it with a bunch of the members, probably get rejected the first time, re-update your proposal, go back. It's this long-winded thing that probably just like deters a ton of people from actually going to participate in the ecosystem. But the idea of having an ERC20 tokenized brand with an agent that own some percentage of the token that you can just go have this kind of fluid, easy dialogue with, go participate, just seems like a pretty meaningful improvement on kind of what Nouns is running at.
Well, and my guess is it does run into similar. You'll find the weak spots in that, and it's almost like those will be seen as edges if you push into the. Nouns has done a very, very good job, frankly, of better than I think most would have thought around distributing that treasury, even though there's a ton of debate around it, et cetera, right? But there's sort of like, it's working. Is it, maybe there's some economic model stuff, or maybe people don't see it working because the price isn't going up, but they're being very effective at building stuff. There's still a ton of energy there. The downside is like, through this AI lens, this is a very boring way to interact. And so I think, that's a great example. And there's some mix of those two that I think will be something that lands. Like, and because I think like, you talk about Aether, like there's a person involved there somewhere, right? And I think it's to Matt's point, right? There's so much of this is art right now more than anything. Yeah. But I think when you actually want to get into those more serious use cases, and if you think of like an agent being an interaction point or a distribution point or a allocation point, then governance of that becomes a big deal. And I think we have a number of governance focused investments through C Club Ventures that I think will turn out to be rather prophetic, because it is this world where they matter even more and more. Exactly. I love it.
Yeah, I think I was just thinking, like, I don't know, I was going to tweet, and I probably will, but just ripping out the entire DAO governance process and just like subbing in an agent would be a really interesting experiment. I don't think it's doing that well anymore. I think
I think doing well is relative, right? I think there are a strong core group of people who really care. Has that broken through into broader awareness? No, but I wouldn't count it out just yet.
No, for sure.
But I think you're right, though. Like, if somebody came around, like, Nouns should be looking at how to disrupt themselves, because somebody will come and do that. And I think that is maybe the bigger risk for.
Yeah, I mean, everything in Nouns just feels so heavy in comparison to like watching these back and forths on Warpcast.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you're not exploring how your product will shift in this world, you're behind.
Yeah,
you're behind.
Cool. Let's jump to the Fat Wallet Thesis. So Robbie, a researcher at Delphi, shared a post this week outlining his Fat Wallet Thesis. Let me pull it up. And I thought it was really good and interesting. So basically, his point is that, well, everyone's talking about applications versus protocols today. He kind of sees wallets as this third layer in the stack, and ultimately, like, he actually thinks a vast majority of the value is gonna flow. And kind of core to his thinking was that both protocols, due to the race to the bottom because of chain abstraction, maturation of the MEV kind of supply chain, and ultimately the agentic paradigm and how just kind of cost focused they're going to be, protocols are going to continue thinning out, which I think we agree with and talk about all the time. But he also thinks that applications are going to thin out because of low switching costs from workability, composability, and cheap token-based acquisition, and ultimately thinks that wallets are going to fatten because of their ownership of distribution and order flow, which he really sees as like the two kind of high leverage things to own. And I agreed with a lot of it. I think, we've talked endlessly about the thinning of infrastructure, and, do think wallets will continue having a ton of leverage, but I think completely disagree on the thin out of applications, or at least the types of applications that we care about. Because if you have brand value, if you have distribution, if you have social network effects, like that's not forkable. And I think a lot of the examples he uses here are kind of unopinionated DeFi interfaces that, take fees, and sure, you jack fees, people need to go to another one that can perform the same job. But I think it's interesting, reading this. Yeah, I think I back on a lot of it, but also just considering where wallets fit into the future of crypto. And I think I hold the belief that the vast majority of people that aren't here they're going to come in through killer applications, and those are probably going to have embedded wallets, and maybe they're going to use one or two crypto apps 99% of the time, and they'll probably be very happy for whatever capital they earn or deposit into those products, just kind of living there. I don't really see this world where more people are kind of chaotic looking for new things to try, like the people that are here.
Well, when's the last time you discovered something interesting to go do from your wallet?
Totally.
I mean, I know like they're integrating daylight and all this sort of stuff, but even, I mean, I think like, yeah, if you ask anybody who's interacting, at least today, and maybe interacting with today, your discovery point is sure as hell not a wallet. It is Dex Screener, it's social, it's all these other places. And then I even think looking forward, I think users will most likely come in through something they care about, whether it's an application or a movement. And, wallets are clearly valuable. So having an embedded wallet and an ecosystem that you keep, that you do a good job of keeping people in, is the way you maximize value there.
Yeah.
And so, and I think being a generic piece of infrastructure, it is very hard to build that deep sense of connection.
Totally.
So
I think what's actually more likely is there will be a few like true breakout mass market killer products that will probably have their own wallet, and then other, you're going to be, let's say Zora, breaks out and becomes the next Instagram. Like every crypto app is going to have a sign in with Zora.
Yeah.
Because
And you see this with
these
these wallet as a service providers. They're building out that functionality.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But it's very worth reading. Brings up a lot of good points. We're kind of out of time. Do you want to touch on this quickly?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is absurdly cringe, and I think people are going to look back on this, and even we talked to Brian a few weeks ago about the movement to Solana. It's just like, bleh, who cares? And I think it actually, I just hope people stop doing it. You want to change, go change chains. I think embedded in this belief is that there's going to be this warm, huge, welcoming group of people, whether you're moving from Solana to ETH. I guess that's probably not happening so much right now, or ETH to Solana. And I just don't think that is true. Right. I think, if you see these announcements, I think actually, if you go into this, we got a lot of Solana people who are super excited, but I would say 80% of them work for the Solana Foundation, which was kind of interesting to me. So I think there's this perception of support. And I think, no shade to Solana Foundation. Everybody I talk to who works with them is just like they clearly do a good job. But what we haven't seen yet is sort of like huge warm embrace. You've moved from ETH and you're in Solana. Great, cool, come. And then it's like, well, no, actually your product needs to be dope and it needs to fit this. And you actually probably need to work into that community a lot more. And so, I think less of a comment on like the business decision here, like that'll play out over the next little while. But I think the perception of what's going to happen is just that people have in their minds when they make the shift is just completely wrong, and it's cringe.
Well, I think we saw that with, Unlonely had their first show since moving to Solana. And, I think it's largely the same story as, the experiences they had on ETH. I do think these announcements are more relevant for the ecosystems than anything. Like, if you're the Ethereum ecosystem or the Ethereum Foundation, like you should be seeing this and being like, this is a thing that is consistently happening. Is there something we can do to fix? Yeah,
there's clearly, I don't know. I just think this is just such a short-term distraction. And maybe that's my ETH bag bias. That's not that much of a bias. I think that we just again are get excited by short-term narratives, and I think Solana has a big challenge ahead of them in scaling and in moving beyond the perception of pure speculation. Like there's clearly a lot going on in that ecosystem, but it's not what people see. And I think ETH needs to move on from this participation trophy culture that kind of exists there. And I think, for ecosystems, that's actually the big point. People want to be a part of something big, something successful, momentum, quality. They want to feel like they're special.
Everyone wants to win, right? And it feels like Solana's winning right now, so they're gonna go.
Well, and I think the way that folks talk, and I think this is big in the base ecosystem, is I would describe it as participation trophy talk. And I think I don't know how you make that shift, because I think you need to keep an open, like a big open tent for developers coming in. But I think being a bit more opinionated here is probably what's needed. And here, guess what? Some of the coolest shit is still being built in the ETH ecosystem. Like this is where people are innovating still. That's developers are still building. So I don't know.
I mean, also just, good apps. Again, I think this thing we've been on recently is just really reminding everybody, including ourselves, that 99% of people aren't here. So 100%. Just doing things to go fight over the small percentage of people that are here is just so short-minded. It's like go create your own distribution outside of this eco chamber where nobody gives a fuck what you're building on.
I mean, Dan had a snippy tweet that was sort of along these lines, right? It's like I moved from AWS to Google Cloud. Congrats, which is all
wrong.
Fair.
This is also wrong, but yeah.
But I think it shows a difference of perception, right? Where I think previous as a founder trying to very much being focused on the current market, because that's the people who are going to use your product. And I think Dan very much has like, I don't care about the current market. Give me the other 99% point of view.
Culture and vibes don't fix D30.
So, I mean, that's
so Dan.
And I disagree with that too. I think culture and vibes can fix D30, not solely, obviously. Give me one lightning round, Josh, because I just feel so incomplete unless we hit the one lightning round.
What do we got here? Oh yeah, I laughed at this. Parents, please check your kids' Halloween candy. Just found another L2 in my child's Snickers bar. I also thought this experiment was really cool and worth looking at. So it's the first agent with like provable autonomy using, and I'd never really had a reason yet to dive into what TEs were, because I just didn't care, but this made me care, and it's super interesting. So I recommend reading this.
Yeah, it reminds me of, I think there's a whole pets discussion happening, a AI pets discussion happening in the Farcaster world, which I also think is pretty interesting to follow. Like, it feels like so you have agents and whatever, they're doing their things and you can talk to them or whatever, but, taking the Tamagotchi point of view and thinking about sort of raising your own agent through the lens of a pet is actually kind of interesting. I think Waj is working on something like that over on Farcaster or Supercast. So I've got my eye on that, though. Looks pretty messy, but I think as a category, it's kind of interesting.
It's cool.
All right. Well over time. I love it. Thanks to Matt for hanging out with us today. Make sure you go check out Spawning.AI. Also want to remind folks of some of the incredible work our friends over at Liquid Culture have been doing with their podcast. Some really incredible guests over the last little while. So really encourage you to go give that a listen. And if you're not a part of the C Club Telegram chat or on our email newsletter, you're going to miss out on the cool shit that we're going to launch in the next little while. So shoot me a DM or hop on in there if you got a link. It'll be well worth your time. Oh, yeah, all good stuff. All right, folks, thanks for hanging out. Wish you a wonderful weekend. And we'll be back here next Friday, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Until then, we'll see you on Chain.
Peace.